Hello. We're going to continue this evening with Bickie's soldier coat. Yesterday we learned that Mother had went to see Mr. Collins to talk to him about the money. And Big Brother John had been gone away, and Uncle Dirk had a secret. Supposedly he had hidden something in the house that there should be plenty of money, he said, to take care of them in Chapter 3. Chapter 2 is where the boys found that odd-looking stone. And Chapter 1 was where they had the fire. So we've learned a little bit about this family. So let's go ahead and continue. Bickie's soldier coat. September was unusually warm that fall. In hopes of a late snow, John put off coming home. He wanted to earn another $10, and perhaps the cold weather would hold off long enough to get the corn, and it wouldn't suffer. The Ross boys, Bickie and Tommy, and their close friend Nels and Pete Whitney played on their way to school as they scurried in and out among the clumps of sunflowers along the country road. At noon, they played ball. At recess and after school, there were games of races and wrestling. There was a new teacher at the Ferguson school, Miss Kitty Shirk. She looked very old to Bickie. He hadn't liked school. He and Tommy frolicked in the late autumn sunshine and forgot that winter would come. It was the morning in early October when the weather changed. Bickie and Tommy had finished their breakfast and their cornmeal mush and milk. They stood at the window in the kitchen room in the granary, looking out at the falling snow. The big snowflakes filled the corners of the panes and stuck to the glass. Bickie rubbed the pane with his hand to clear the moisture on the inside. He pressed his nose against the glass. It looked cold outdoors. "Come on, boys. It's time to go. You will be late for school." Still Bickie lingered at the window. Never in his life had he ever dreaded so much to go to school. "Get your coat, Bickie," Mother's voice urged. "It's cold today, and you will need it." "But, Mother, I don't feel cold. I'll run. It's only a little ways, just a mile." "Well, run. We will run, won't we, Tommy?" Bickie looked at his brother. No, Mother said, and she put the last of their jelly sandwich in their dinner bucket. "No, Bickie, you can never run fast enough to keep warm on this day, and you will have to wear the coat." Then the brown eyes grew soft and gentle. "At least it will keep you warm, Bickie." He looked at Mother's hands, all red and wrinkled from washing so many clothes. He was a little ashamed that he felt so unhappy about wearing that old coat. Mother would get new ones if she could, for sure. She seemed to be reading his thoughts. "We are fortunate to have food to eat, and it was providential that those trunks were stored in the granary. Otherwise, you boys wouldn't have had any coats at all." She smiled at him. "We have each other. We have a warm, dry place to live, and we have enough food to eat. We should be very thankful." Oh, but Bickie didn't feel thankful. He looked at Tommy's coat. 2 years ago, it had belonged to him. Before that, Brother John had worn it. The night of the fire, Red Hog Smith had snatched it from the wall and thrown it out of the window with all the other things. It was ragged and thin, but not so bright and conspicuous as that old blue coat. He brought the despised garment from the hook in the kitchen wall where all the heavy jackets hung. Mother buttoned up the big brass buttons all the way up. It fit tight around Bickie's neck. When Daddy was living, it fit him tight all the way down. But Bickie, at 9 years old, he only shuffled around in it and looked like a pole in a heavy blue tent. It was a coat of a dashing northern soldier. Its swallowtails dragged 2 inches on the floor when Bickie wore it, although he stretched himself as tall as he could. It had dragged 3 or 4 more inches last spring. He wore that coat a couple of times after the fire, but the boy found no comfort in it. "Let me cut off the tails," Mother said. Mother turned to Bickie around so she could see the back of the coat. "Oh, no, Mother. It looks worse that way. I saw one of those tails cut off before." Bickie grabbed his mittens and a shiny dinner bucket, and he hurried over to overtake Tommy. The boys ran. There was no time to walk. Bickie hoped that they would get to the school before the school bell rang so the other children wouldn't have time to make remarks about his coat before they got into the classroom. "Oh, look," one of the boys shouted when the 2 Ross boys came to the playground. "Look, here comes the soldier." "How are you, soldier?" All the voices took up taunting. They screamed at him and laughed, shouting in military fashion. Bickie's heart sank. It would be just like last spring. The new teacher stood in the door. She had been teaching at Ferguson School only about a month. Miss Kitty had the bell in her hand. Bickie saw her lips twitch. She wanted to laugh too. He thought bitterly, anyone would want to laugh at a boy walking to school with an old blue uniform coat dragging the tails on the ground. And here, if you can see, if you see right there, those are the tails that they're talking about. That was his dad's military jacket, and his had gotten destroyed in the fire of their home. And there's snow on the ground. So, not very many pictures in this book, is there? Anyway, the line formed and the pupils marched into the entry hall. Here the boys and girls took off their wraps and they hung them on hooks all along the wall. Bickie was the last one. He looked at the row of overcoats. His old blue one stuck out from the others like a red comb on a white rooster. He paused for a minute to feel the cloth of some of the finer coats hanging there. He knew he could have never had such a coat for his own. With that fire and Mr. Collins, Bickie walked to his desk. One of the boys jolted him and whispered in a low voice, "Soldier, soldier!" The children were all at their desks. Morning exercises were soon over, and the first graders' class went forward to recite. Pete Whitney, Bickie's best friend, put his foot in the aisle, and he nudged Bickie's foot just enough to make him look down. Then he looked up at Pete. Pete's red hair was tousled all over his head. His freckles seemed to dance all over his face as he grinned and made a funny face. He held a big red onion underneath his desktop. He was scratching it and tickling the onion. Bickie remembered the teacher. Miss Kitty hated onions. She couldn't bear the smell of onions. Sometimes the Whitney boys brought onion sandwiches in their lunch boxes. Bickie knew that Miss Kitty would smell this red onion on Pete and come looking for it. Pete must be thinking the same thing. He motioned for Bickie to be ready to receive that onion. "Children," Miss Kitty drew a scowl, "I smell onion." She went, sniffed the air. "Which one of you has that onion?" The children looked at one another with big questioning eyes, but no one answered the question. Pete Whitney turned clear around in his seat to look back at his older brother Nels sitting 3 desks behind him. Nels stared back at Pete with a perfectly innocent expression on his face. The first grade class droned on. Miss Kitty fidgeted with the things in her desk. Her gray top knot wobbled, that's a little bun on her head, a little, and the flat bow of her black velvet ribbon against her throat moved up and down quite fast, because they used to wear necklaces then like that. Bickie remembered that what Nels told him the first day of school this fall. He explained why Miss Kitty was so thin. That's because she never eats onions. Pete still turned the red onion around and around in his hands, tearing off another layer of its skin and scratching it deeply with his sharp fingernails. "I smell onion!" Miss Kitty got to her feet with an angry look on her face. She darted towards Pete and Whitney's desk. He slid down as far as he could go, making himself as small as possible. The chubby lad fixed his big gray eyes on the teacher's face. With his right hand, he let the onion down on the floor, and he pushed it gently, and it rolled over towards Bickie's seat. Bickie caught it firmly between his feet. "Hold up your hands," the teacher commanded Pete. He held them up, and instantly the whiff of onions almost strangled her. She coughed and she sneezed. "Take that disgusting onion out of your pocket." Miss Kitty raised her hand as to give a sharp cuff to Peter's ear, which is kind of like a slap. But he dodged the blow. I haven't got it," Pete stammered and pretended to fear of her in agony. He glanced towards Bickie. "Bicknell, Haverhill, Ross, hold up your hands," the teacher said. Bickie's hands being pure and clean and no smell of onions, were held up in haste, and he passed the inspection. After watching Pete's pockets and the desk, the teacher went back to the first grade reading class. Then the onion was carefully rolled back again towards Pete's desk, where he picked it up again, and he began picking it again, encouraging it to give off more stronger smells. Miss Kitty glared back at him several times and finally said, "Peter, you may stay in at recess." By recess time, it was snowing so hard, none of the children could go outside and play. They played in the classroom. They played ox and crosses at the blackboard. It's like X and O's. By noon, when everyone sat at his desk to eat lunch, the blue coat was all but forgotten. Bickie hoped it was forgotten. He ate his jam sandwich with some relish. Still, his mind was busy trying to think of some plan for getting rid of that old blue coat. How he wished it would have burned up in that fire. Now, if some poor man came along, he thought, he would give him his coat. Or maybe he would lose his coat, but it was so big and so bright of a color that it would be hard to lose in a field or a pasture. If the schoolhouse would burn down, maybe the coat would burn up too. No. Or a flood that would swallow, the creek would come up and it would get in the creek and maybe it would get lost. No. And the coat would be torn off him if he was in the water and got lost in the swirling water. Or maybe a tornado would come, like the one over in Marshalltown. It would just twist that coat right off his back and carry it up in the sky, and it would never be seen again. Oh, if only one of those things could happen. Then he would be like the other boys, and no one would call him soldier anymore. That evening, the four boys walked home together, Bickie and Tommy Ross, with Pete and Nels Whitney. The snowfall had stopped, but the strong wind was blowing. The boys scuffled with each other all the way home. The wind lifted Bickie's cap right off of his hair and threw it right into the sky. "It's in those weeds," Pete shouted. The boys scrambled through the snowdrifts, but when they looked, they couldn't find the cap. It was all but gone. The weed patch covered an acre of ground, and the wind blew harder every minute. Bickie put both hands over his ears, and he ran all the way home. Mother asked when he burst into the door, huffing and puffing and panting with Tommy just behind him, "Where is your cat, Bickie?" "It's lost. A big puff of wind," he said. He puffed with a feeling of sadness and deep shame. "I lost it, Mother. The wind just pulled it right off my head. Really, it did. It carried it away in the air." He stretched his hands high to show how the wind had just went whoof and took his cap right away. "We hunted everywhere, really, Mother, we did, but we couldn't find it. We all looked. Didn't we, Tommy? Didn't we?" Mother looked worried. "Well, you can't go to school without a cap. Whatever will we do?" So she put the iron away that she was using back on the hot stove for a minute. "I wonder," she said. "I'll look in the big trunk. It may be in Grandpa's old plug hat is still there. It will come down over your ears and will shut out all that wind. I'm going to have you get I'm not going to have you get an earache this winter if I can help it." "Oh, Mother!" Bickie felt a sickness rising in his stomach. "Mother!" He followed her into the small front room of the granary. "Mother, please let me just wear a scarf. Wrap a scarf around my head, please, Mother, please." She shook her head and burrowed right back into the big black trunk. She drew up a big paper sack. "I think it's here," she said. "Whew." She untied the sack. She reached in. "Look, it's in fine shape." She drew out the black plug hat. Its crown was stuffed with soft paper to keep its shape. "It's almost brand new," she said as she fitted it onto Bickie's head. Tears stung his eyes. There was a tight, bitter knot in his throat. Then he turned and he saw Tommy had followed them into the room. Tommy was grinning. Bickie gripped him by the shoulder and gave him a hard pinch. Mother took hold of Bickie and turned him around before Tommy could hit him with his doubled fist. "Bickie," she said, and her voice was low and sad, "I know that it is hard for you to wear this old blue coat, military coat, and now this plug hat. It is hard to be a poor boy, but we will not always be poor. We will have all work together, then we will not be poor. And no one needs to complain. We will love each other and trust in God. That is what we're going to do." Bickie looked down at the floor, and he nodded at his head at his mother. "I can make you a cap, but not before the morning. I have so much ironing to finish. I will have to be up late tonight to get it done." So she carried the plug hat out into the kitchen, and the boys followed her. Bickie felt ashamed of himself, but in his mind he could see the picture of himself walking into the school grounds tomorrow morning with the old blue military coat and a plug hat. Maybe he could pull off the hat and carry it in his hand when he got closer to the school, he thought. For a while, he thought, and then he decided that would look even worse. Wow, poor Bickie. He just doesn't seem to catch a break here, does he? Well, tomorrow is chapter 5, The Thunder Egg Stone. So far we've learned that their house burnt and their neighbor helped them out. And in chapter 2, we learned that the big brother worked away from home and that Mr. Collins was going to try to foreclose on their house. And then yesterday we read that Uncle Dirk had a secret that he had hidden some money or something, but Mother never found it. And now that the house is burnt down, she's all but given up that there will be anything for them to find. And then today, he had to wear his dad's military coat because he didn't have a jacket that fit him and Mother couldn't afford one because they owed so much money. $300 doesn't sound like very much, but back then it was like $1 million. So tomorrow, 8 o'clock, I will see you all then.